Good day, everyone. Today, our group will present a notable case involving the use of DNA profiling in the Philippines. People of the Philippines versus Jewel Yatar, also known as Kawit. This case is important because it demonstrates how modern forensic science, particularly DNA analysis, is used in the legal system to determine the truth in criminal cases. It also shows how courts carefully evaluate scientific evidence before making a final judgment. In this presentation, we will discuss the material facts of the case, explain how DNA profiling was used to clarify the issues, and analyze how the courts applied on the role of DNA evidence. We will also trace the decisions from the regional trial court to the Court of Appeals and finally to the Supreme Court. Lastly, we will examine key issues such as reliability of DNA evidence and the importance of maintaining a proper chain of custody.
The first one is material fact of the case. The case revolves around the violent crime involving rape and homicide. The victim was found dead, and the condition of the body suggested the sexual assault and occurred before the killing. This immediately led investigators to treat the case as both a rape and murder investigation. The authorities gathered physical evidence from the crime scene, including biological samples that could potentially identify the perpetrator. Joel Yatar became a suspect during the investigation. However, at the early stage, the evidence against him was not entirely conclusive. Witness testimonies and circumstantial evidence raised suspicion, but they were not enough to establish guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Because of this, forensic evidence, particularly DNA analysis, became crucial in determining whether he was truly responsible for the crime.
Number 2 is the explanation of DNA profiling. To understand the importance of this case, we must first explain what is DNA profiling. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, is the genetic material found in all human beings. Each individual has a unique DNA pattern, except for identical twins. Because of this uniqueness, DNA can be used to identify a person with a very high degree of accuracy. DNA profiling involves collecting biological samples such as blood, semen, saliva, or hair from the crime scene. These samples are then analyzed in a laboratory and compared with the DNA of the suspect. If there is a match, it can strongly indicate that the person was present at the crime scene. In criminal law, DNA evidence is considered highly reliable, but it must still be handled and interpreted properly to be accepted in court.
In this case, biological samples were collected from the victim's body and the crime scene. These samples were believed to contain the DNA of the perpetrator. The investigators then obtained a DNA sample from Joel Yatar for comparison. The purpose of this process was to determine whether the accused was linked to the crime through scientific evidence. The DNA testing results became a central piece of evidence in the case. The courts examined whether the DNA profile taken from the crime scene matched that of the accused. This scientific comparison helped clarify whether Joel Yatar could be directly connected to the commission of the crime. The DNA findings either strengthened the prosecution's case or created doubt about the accused's involvement.
Application of the rule on DNA evidence. The rule on DNA evidence under AM number 0611 5AC provides the legal framework for the use of DNA in the Philippine courts. It sets standards for how DNA evidence should be collected, preserved, and analyzed. It also outlines how courts should evaluate the reliability and probative value of DNA results. In this case, the court examined whether the DNA evidence presented complied with these standards. This includes checking if proper procedure were followed during collection, if the samples were preserved without contamination, and if the testing methods were scientifically valid. The court also considered the statistical significance of the DNA match. Through this rule, the court ensured that the DNA evidence was both credible and admissible before using it to decide the case.
RTC and Court of Appeal decision. At the level of the regional trial court, the judge evaluates all the evidence presented, including the DNA result, witness testimony, and other physical evidence. The RTC determined whether the prosecution was able to prove the guilt of the accused beyond reasonable doubt. The decision was based on how convincing and reliable the evidence was a whole. When the case was evaluated to the Court of Appeals, the appellate court reviewed the findings of RTC. The Court of Appeals examined whether there were errors in the appreciation of evidence, particularly with respect to the DNA findings. It also assessed whether the lower court correctly applied the law. The CAS rule or the CA's rule was not to retry the case, but to ensure that justice was properly administered based on the evidence presented.
Supreme Court ruling. The case eventually reached the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the Philippines. The Supreme Court conducted a thorough review of both the facts and the law. They analyzed the DNA evidence as well as how it was handled and presented in the lower courts. In its ruling, the Supreme Court emphasized that DNA evidence is a powerful tool in criminal investigations, but it must meet strict standards of reliability. The court looked into whether the chain of custody was properly maintained and whether the testing procedures were accurate. So the final decision of the Supreme Court ultimately determined the guilt or innocence of Joel Yatar and reinforced the importance of proper forensic practices in the justice system.
One of the major issues in this case is the chain of custody of the DNA evidence. This refers to the documented process of handling evidence from the time it is collected until it is presented in the court. Any break or irregularity in this chain can raise doubts about the integrity of the evidence. The court carefully examined whether the DNA samples were properly handled to ensure that they were not contaminated or tampered with. Another important issue is the reliability of DNA testing. While DNA evidence is highly accurate, errors can still occur if proper procedures are not followed. In conclusion, this case shows that DNA profiling is a valuable tool in achieving justice. It can help convict the guilty and protect the innocent, but only if it is used correctly and responsibly. This highlights the need for strict compliance with legal scientific standards in handling forensic evidence.
In conclusion, the case of the people of the Philippines versus Joel Yatar alias Kawit clearly demonstrate the vital role of DNA profiling in the Philippine justice system. Throughout our discussion, we have seen how DNA evidence was used to clarify the facts of the case and assist the courts in determining the truth. From the investigation stage up to the Supreme Court level, DNA analysis serves as a powerful scientific tool in evaluating whether the accused was truly connected to the crime. However, this case also teaches us that DNA evidence alone is not enough without proper handling and strict compliance with legal standards. The court emphasized the importance of the rule on DNA evidence, particularly ensuring the reliability of result and maintaining an unbroken chain of custody. Ultimately, this case highlights the balance between science and law, showing that DNA profiling can strongly support justice. It must always be carefully applied to protect both the rights of the accused and the integrity of legal process. Thank you.
I just had to let you know you're